Hello everyone, this is Mr. Hussein Mwasapi, and in today's video we'll be focusing on what is known as a complex number. So we'll be looking at complex numbers. Now before we begin, don't forget to like and subscribe to this channel. Alright, every time you're looking at complex numbers, the first thing you should understand is the definition of complex numbers. Now complex numbers are simply just numbers that are made up of a real part and an imaginary part. Numbers made up of a real part and simply an imaginary part. Just like human beings have real friends and fake friends, even complex numbers have a real part and an imaginary part. With this in mind, we can quickly look at the standard form for all complex numbers. The standard form for all complex numbers is simple to understand. This standard form is simply z being equivalent to a plus bi. In future videos, you will get to understand this form clearly, but for now, this is the standard form, written as z being equivalent to a plus bi. Now in this form, z is the complex number. A is simply the real part. And bi is the imaginary part. Bear this in mind. Now complex numbers have a lot of subtopics, but we can quickly understand these subtopics by finding means of simplifying them. So I'll explain all the basics of complex numbers as simple as I can do. Alright, so we'll begin with the first basic, which involves graphing of complex numbers. So let's look at how to graph complex numbers. Now, before we look at any example, let's understand something. We know that the standard form of all complex numbers is z being equivalent to a plus what? bi. Now, with this in mind, whenever you're trying to plot these values, remember, a is the real value and b is the imaginary value. There is an axis that we use. This axis is known as the imaginary or real axis or imaginary axis. So the y-axis is the imaginary axis, which is commonly referred to as the y, and the x-axis is what? The real axis, referred as what? The x. This point is the center. So the y is the imaginary axis, whereas the x is the real axis. So in relationship to the standard form, in coordinate form, this standard form that we have is the same as a comma b, where a is the real axis while b is what? Imaginary axis. So it's like you're having a and what? B, and they're meeting at some point, which is what? Z, from the center. Now let's quickly jump to some examples. Let's call this example number 1. In example number 1, let's say we've been told to graph the following complex numbers. Graph the following complex numbers. So let's say a is given as 3 plus 4i. So in order for us to graph this, step 1, let z equal 3 plus 4i. Then after that, draw the imaginary and real axis. So we know that this is the imaginary axis and this is what? The real axis. And this is our center. So in coordinate form, this here can be written as what? 3 comma what? 4, where the real is 3 and 4 is our imaginary part. So we'll be moving 3 steps to the positive real axis. We know that this is the positive side of the real axis, and we know that this is the negative side of the real axis. So we'll be moving towards the what? The positive side, and just pick a point along the real axis and call it what? 3. So I'll call this point 3, and I can pick 4 on the imaginary axis. Any point here can be called what? 4. So I'll pick this point to be what? 4. Then I have to join these points. Wherever these points meet is our z, our complex number, like that. Let's look at another example. Example number 2, which is B. Let's say we have -4 minus 5i. You can pause the video and attempt to do this question on your own. Step 1, let z be equal to -4 minus 5i. After that, what are we supposed to do? We now draw the imaginary and real what? Axis. So this is the imaginary axis, and this is simply what? The real axis. So we're moving in the coordinate of -4 minus what? 5. So I'm moving -4 steps on the real axis. We know this is the negative side, so that's where we'll focus on. So any point along the negative side, any point here. So we pick this point to be our -4. Now any point in the negative imaginary axis will be our minus what? 5. Then when you connect these dots, this point of intersection is our z. By doing this, you have simply graphed your what? Complex number. Just as simple as this. Example C is say 9 minus 5i. Step 1, let z equal 9 minus 5 what? I. After that, draw the imaginary and real axis. So this is the imaginary axis, and this is simply the real axis. So this is our center O, or 0 to be precise. So in coordinate form, z is simply 9, -5. So I'm moving 9 steps on the positive real axis. So this is 9. And I'm moving -5 steps on the negative imaginary axis. So this will be -5. If we connect the dots, where these dots meet at this point is our point of interest, and at this point we'll call z. Now this example involves us graphing a complex number or complex numbers on separate axes. Now sometimes they might ask you to graph complex numbers on the same axis. The procedure is one and the same, and what you have to do is very simple. So let's look at example number 2 now. Say we have example number 2. Example number 2 says graph, end of this, graph the following complex numbers, let's say on the same axis. On the same axis. Say we have A, which is z being equivalent to 4 plus 3i, B, z being equivalent to -2 minus 3i, C being equivalent to z just being equal to 2, D being equivalent to z being equivalent to -3. E is equivalent to z being equal to 4i, and F is z being equal to -3i. So all we have to do is simply write solution and draw our axis. So we have the imaginary and draw what? Axis. Alright, this is not big enough, so let me just create more space. So this is our imaginary and this is our real axis. So this is our imaginary axis and this is our real axis. Alright, now all we have to do first is simply collect some data. So if you notice, A and B are written in a correct standard form, but if you look at these others, they're not really in a very, very correct standard form. But though even the way they are is just okay, but in terms of plotting, just put it in a way you can understand. So let's call this Z1, Z2, Z3, Z4, Z5, and finally 6. So let's fix Z3. Z3 has a real part, but doesn't really have an imaginary part. So we say 2 plus 0i. Z4 has no imaginary part, so we say minus 3 plus 0i. Z5 has no real part, but it has an imaginary part. So introduce a real part. So we say 0 plus what? 4i. Then Z6 has no real part, but has an imaginary part. So we say 0 minus 3i. Just like that. So we use this information to plot these complex numbers. So the first complex number A has 4, 3. So we can just pick 4 to be at any particular point. But sometimes if we want, we can just look at all the values that are in the real axis. In the real axis, you're having 4. The common numbers you're having 4 and 0 on the positive side. So you can just pick, okay, my range will be 2 to what? 4. If you want, you can say 1, 2. Since the same axis, we can say 1, 2, so this will be 3. So put 3 here. Then 4, 5. This side we have minus 1, minus 2, minus 3, minus 4, and minus 5. This side we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. We have minus 1, minus 2, minus 3, minus 4. So we'll just stick with minus 4. Alright, so let's try and plot these or graph them to say. So this one here is having 4, 3. So you go to 4, positive 4 on the real axis, and positive 3 on the imaginary axis. If you connect the dots and see where these 2 points meet, this point is Z1. So that's our graph for Z1. Then Z2 has a minus 2 and a minus 3. If you connect the dots, they meet at this point. So this point will be called our Z2. Z3 is simply here. So Z3 is positive 2 on the real and 0 on the imaginary. So this point will be Z what? 3. Z4 is negative 3 on the real and 0 on the imaginary. So this point will be Z4. Then Z5 is 7. It's 0 plus 4i. So it has no real, but has an imaginary of 4. So we go 4 digits on the imaginary axis. And this is our Z what? 5. Z6 has no real, but has an imaginary negative value. So you're having negative 3 there. So this will be what? Z6. By doing this, it implies that you have graphed all the complex numbers that were given. This is a very simple topic to do. In fact, a very simple subtopic or basic topic that we have in the complex numbers. Alright, so if you have more questions based on this video, kindly contact me on WhatsApp on the number that you see on your top corner there, or the number I'll put in my description. Alright, this is Mr. Hussein Mosapi. Remember to like and subscribe to this channel. It's very important to strategize before you become a statistic. And let's try and get those A+.